All right. Well, hello, everyone. We are excited to be here with you today on Tuesday. And I have with me here today our guest, Lindsay Vick, who is the owner of Sunflowers Healing and Wellness in Alexandria, Virginia. Is it in Alexandria, right?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. We're going to discuss a few questions that I have for Lindsay, but if you have any additional questions, please feel free to type them in the chat and we'll try to get to those as well. So first of all, Lindsay, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do? I find that when I use the terms hypnotherapist or Reiki master, I get a lot of blank stares.
Yeah.
So why don't you help us understand a little bit more about what you do?
I sure will. Thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me to be with you this morning. It's a pleasure to join you and to share more about these wonderful tools. For people who don't know, most people, when they hear about the term hypnosis, they think of stage shows, they think of entertainment, they think of the cruise ship show, right? Clucking like a chicken, but and it can be for that, and that can be a lot of fun, but it can also be a wonderful therapeutic tool to help people recover from trauma, release stress, fears, worries, anxieties, achieve a goal that has been elusive for them in the past, and really anything else that they might seek to accomplish that they haven't been able to do on their own. Hypnosis is a state of mind that is very easy to achieve. In fact, we all enter that state of mind many times a day. We talk about in the industry, we use a term called highway hypnosis, which is the state that you are in when you're driving a familiar route on the highway and you take your exit and you end up at your destination and you pull in and you realize, I don't remember the last 11 turns.
Or like yesterday, I was supposed to.
How did I get here?
Yeah, I was supposed to pick up my son at one place, but I always go to this other place, and I drove to that other place. And
yes,
I got there, I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm not supposed to be
right, right. And it doesn't indicate that you weren't driving safely. You were eyes on the road, paying attention to your surroundings, but your brain was operating on a different level, and that different level is hypnosis. And so that can happen for us, without intent, while we're driving, while we're brushing our teeth, while we're cooking a meal that we've made dozens of times, while we're reading a book or watching a television show, and we become so engrossed in what's happening that we emote with the characters as though we were part of that experience, right? That's another form of hypnosis. What I do is I help my clients enter that state deliberately. And the purpose of entering that state is to achieve one of the goals that I've mentioned, releasing a fear or an anxiety, recovering from a trauma. PTSD is a big thing. Achieving a goal that they've set for themselves, whether it is, for your viewers, a birth that, has a certain outcome, a pregnancy that can be calm and peaceful. For many of my clients, that's what we're working on, but I also work with non-pregnant people as well. I like to say I got into this work because I wanted to help pregnant people and their families. And one of my very first clients was a professional athlete who was not pregnant, doesn't have the ability to be pregnant, but needed to achieve certain goals in order to maximize their athletic event. And I thought, well, thank you, universe. That is my wake up call to expand my work and make it available to anyone that it can benefit. In hypnosis, we achieve first a physical level of relaxation, typically through some progressive muscle relaxation exercises, some breath work, and then we do what's called a deepener, where we actually enter that state of mind, state of being. I tend to use a lot of visualizations. I find most people can relate to, the creation of a scene, being in a certain place, or feelings for some people who aren't visual, for feeling a certain way or having a certain set of understanding or awareness. And then we do what I call the meat of the session, and that is achieving the goal. And we typically close by viewing our life as having achieved this goal already, whether it's a fear that we've released. What does life look like without that fear being part of it? What new windows of opportunity are open for you now? And so it's a lovely way to close. It's a very uplifting way to close. Many of my clients will tell me at the end that felt like a massage for my brain. I feel like I'm walking on air, but the most common response that I hear is that's not what I was expecting. And then, we talk about what the expectation was. Well, they were expecting to feel hypnotized. And I'll warn everyone, there's no one way to feel when you are in
control. Is that what they mean?
Yeah. Hypnosis is actually a heightened sense of awareness and control. When you enter hypnosis, you are not giving control up or away to anyone other than your own self. And I think what more empowerment, right? What a more empowered way of being than being in complete and total control of your thoughts, of your awareness, of your beliefs, right? Of your imprints. It's a wonderful tool, I think, to have just in life and in general. So that's a little bit about hypnotherapy. Sessions with me take 2 hours for our first session. We spend a little bit of that time talking as you might with a clinical therapist. I'm not that, but if you went to therapy, you have these similar kinds of conversations. We spend about an hour doing hypnosis and another 15, 20 minutes or so on the tail end to help process and talk about next steps.
Right.
So that's one of the... Yeah, that's the hypnosis is one of my work lines. Reiki energy healing is another, and I'll tell you, it's an interesting story how I got into that. When I started this business, I thought I'm going to teach this childbirth class, and I'm going to do hypnotherapy for clients. And then I learned about energy healing, and I thought, well, that's amazing. I want to learn that too. And the first certification class that I found had the nice price tag of $10,000. Wow. For level 1. There are 3 levels. And I thought, well, that's not for me.
That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Fast forward a few years, I found a community-based class that was teaching level 1 for a donation of canned goods for food drive. I jumped on that. Reiki energy healing is it's an ancient form of healing that's based on a premise that we hold energy within our bodies. We hold that energy on our skin, on our muscles, in our tendons, in our cells, in our blood. But we also hold it in non-tangible parts of our body, those parts that we can't see, but we just sort of know are there. Everyone can relate to just having a gut feeling about something and having absolutely nothing tangible to base that feeling on. Our energy is held in that place as well. So it's based on this premise that we hold energy, but also that energy can be harnessed, it can be influenced, it can be used, it can be manipulated, and I use that word in the most positive sense. Sure. Right. So when we do this, we typically use our hands, although Reiki can be done without touch. It can be done across time, distance, and space. But typically it's an in-person kind of session. And we might start off the same as any kind of therapy session by just talking about, what brings the client in, what their goals and hopes are for, their future. And then we do the session, and the session includes laying down, usually on a massage table, and the practitioner would walk around the person using their hands at different energy hubs around the body. Most people are familiar with the term chakra, but maybe they don't know what that really means. It is a term that describes an energy hub within the body. Chakras, and there are other terms in other languages. Sanskrit has their own terms. It's very common in certain parts of the world to talk about energy in these ways. it was brought to the Western world by a Japanese professor, and he was challenged by his students to figure out what those ancient healings were that were used by many religious figures of the past, Buddha, Jesus, others. And legend has it that he sat on top of a mountain and he meditated, and this information was downloaded to him. And then he shared that information in what we call attunements with other people. Those other people then passed that information on via attunement to others, and so on and so on. As a Reiki trainer, I pass that information on to my students via an attunement, and I ask them to keep track of who attuned them and who their family history is, who's that lineage behind them. So my lineage is 6 degrees separated from Dr. Usui, who was the Japanese professor. So it's not a very long history, but it's a fascinating history when you look back at that lineage and kind of how things have spread and brought to places where our viewers are right now.
Right.
So in a nutshell, Reiki harnesses that energy in our body and transforms it into something that is positive and beneficial. Most people experience it as kind of feeling like a buzz of energy moving through their body or electricity. Most people experience warmth from my hands or from the area where I am working. Many people experience what I'll call visions. They might see colors, they might see images floating past their eyes. Their eyes are usually closed. And many people have really profound insights and wisdom that comes to them during sessions. It is most helpful for people who have a hard time unwinding or letting go, people who have a lot of pent-up energy, people who have a lot of fear or stress that is just part of their everyday life. We'll talk about fear very specifically later, but one of the things that is very common is that it's so woven into our everyday that it's difficult to isolate fear or stress and the impact that they have on our lives. So Reiki is wonderful for that kind of person who just really lives a very high-strung life.
Right. Well, I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm going to save them for later on.
Okay.
I wanted to move forward with what you just brought up, was this idea of like fear manifesting itself. How does fear manifest itself in our bodies, but also what is the impact of fear physiologically on our body?
Yeah. So at a very basic level, when we are experiencing fear, and fear is an emotion, when we are experiencing that emotion, there's an immediate physical effect on the body. And that physical effect comes from our sense of survival. Our brain starts redirecting the blood flow through our body. And by doing that, in order to do that, it sends messages to our vessels, our blood vessels, to constrict, to redirect blood to our essential organs and to those parts of our bodies that are necessary to get us out of that danger situation. This was very beneficial to us when the danger was, the apex predator that was chasing us. Today, that's not the danger that we're facing. In fact, today, most of the fear, I think anyway, most of the fear that we experience is perceived fear rather than actual fear. It is the fear of something that might happen versus the fear of something that is right there in our face, presenting us with a factual, danger. And since our brain doesn't really distinguish between actual and perceived fear, it still follows through as though this perceived fear is real, that it's an actual present threat, right? And so our body then constricts vessels, we get more blood shunted to the heart, maybe to our legs, so we can run the heck out of there, but we're not getting an adequate flow of blood to the frontal cortex of the brain, which is going to allow us to think and make decisions about what's happening so that we can relieve ourselves of this situation. Right? How often have you had a client say to you, I don't know, I can't decide. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That
their brain is flooded with cortisol.
So hard to make decisions.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it can be very difficult to make decisions. It can be difficult to catch our breath at times. We feel winded. We might feel like our heart is racing. We might feel like we just can't settle. We might have butterflies in our stomach. We might have an upset stomach, nausea, and digestive issues are very common with fear.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of my clients come to me, and just as a sidebar, the issue of digestion comes up, and it is not at all a surprise to me to learn that they suffer from constipation or they suffer from diarrhea. They might have, a diagnosis for that, like IBS or something.
I was going to say, sounds like IBS.
Yes, absolutely. It is very, very common, unfortunately. And it is a result of chronic stress and fear and the effect that that has on our body and that blood restriction that I mentioned. Yeah. So those are some very immediate impacts. Over time, we've lots of studies out there on the impact of stress and fear on heart health. And I won't go into a whole lot of that, but that is definitely a result of chronic stress that can come from fear and anxiety held over a lifetime.
Right. You're just imagining if blood constriction is the result of fear, how many organs can that impact?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And
tell us a little bit more about pregnancy and birth, like how.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah. I was going to say, as for your viewers, many of whom may be pregnant or thinking about it or having given birth, the impact of fear on pregnancy is twofold. There's an impact on the pregnant person's health. There's also an impact on the baby and how that baby's brain develops. There's a wonderful researcher who looked at the impact of the pregnant person's emotional well-being and health during pregnancy, and found that when that person experienced a lot of stress or traumas in particular, the trickle-down effect for the baby that person is growing is the baby's brain develops a little bit differently. I'll quote him, Dr. Joseph Chillam Pierce says that it's almost like the baby has to decide, can we be creative? Can we be, forward thinking, or do we have to protect ourselves again? Yeah. Right. And so that was very powerful to me. And it really influenced how I support pregnant people and the people around them too, because often it's the people around them who hold the most influence on how well they process the normal everyday stress that's part of all of our lives, right? Mm-hmm. So when that whole family unit can be healthy, that benefits the pregnant person and the infant. Impact on pregnancy might be that as the uterus is growing, which is an organ, right? A muscle. And then inside of that, we have an organ, the placenta. Mm-hmm. If blood flow isn't adequate, then we have placenta issues. We have an inadequate placenta that's not able to provide the blood flow and the nutrients to the growing baby that is necessary. We have a uterus that might not get enough blood flow to grow properly. We might have restrictions with the baby's growth. And then we might have impacts to how the baby's position is held. How the mother physically feels or grows, how that pregnant person physically feels and grows. And we have an impact in the labor process as well. Fear in the labor process can inhibit labor from beginning, from completing, from progressing in a normal pattern. And this isn't to say that, if you have no fear in your life, you're going to have a perfect pregnancy and a perfect labor. That's just not for us to decide. But you do have a better chance of having a physiologically normal experience, normal being there are ups and downs, when you are able to relax and release fear. Right. So yeah, there are quite a few impacts for both that person and the baby.
Right. So I know it would be impossible to eliminate fear or anxiety altogether, but what are some things that we can do to reduce our exposure to or our perceived fear?
Yeah.
Fears.
Right. I think one of the things that I've done in my own life that I think has been very helpful to me is to limit the sources of media that that I take in, that I digest. Particularly in times like, where what we're experiencing now with a lot of political unrest, a lot of civil unrest, and for very good reasons, I think. But overload is a thing. And every person needs to understand and respect their own personal boundaries and limitations with that overload of information. So that's one.
Too much. I need to.
Yeah. Learn when to step out, learn when to step in. For some people, leaning into that makes them feel empowered. It makes them feel like they're doing something. And I'm getting to my bigger point, that makes them feel like they have some control. Right. So fear itself is all about, one of the things it's all about is lack of control. So where can you find some control? So know your personal boundaries and respect them. I think that's a longer term kind of strategy for reducing stress and fear in our lives. Some other things that you might do, this is more tactical. There are tools and techniques that can be very efficient for releasing fears. Visualization, breathing, relaxation, emotional freedom technique, which is tapping. Are you familiar with tapping?
I've heard of it, but I've never done it.
Okay. I'm not a practitioner in tapping, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but you find certain parts of the body and you just tap on them. There are very specific places and very prescriptive things that you would say while you do that. And there's some good information out there on the effectiveness of tapping. So that can also be a good long-term strategy. I think also in terms of, knowing where your personal boundaries are and respecting them, taking account of what's important to you, and making lists. I'm a big list maker. So I make lists of, things that I'm grateful for. I make lists of things that I want to accomplish both, next year and today. So making those lists helps me feel like I have some control of my life. It also helps me feel accomplished when I can cross things off that list. So again, that's a long-term kind of, you're building yourself and you're building your own resolve to do things, and that contributes to feeling like you have some control. And I think shorter term, really sitting down and deciding what is in my control, right? What are things that I can do on a daily basis that help me to feel better? Those are those self-care kinds of things. I know that self-care is a big trending term right now, but what does that really mean to you as an individual? It's advice that I give to clients all the time. You need to take some time for self-care. And they look at me like, well, I get up at 6 o'clock with the baby, and then I have to be at work at 8, and my toddler's demanding new French toast by 8:15 because the one I made for him didn't work, or he threw it on the floor. And then I have this and this and this and this and this and this and that. And then the kids go to bed at 7. I have dinner and I'm exhausted. When is the time for that self-care? Right. And it's a valid question. I think, part of the answer is that this is a season of life. Recognize that this will change. Doesn't make the right now different or better, but it will change. And if self-care is a priority, then we figure it out. Right. And I think for too long, we haven't made it a priority. We have expected parents to be able to do everything and to do everything well. Sarah, you and I were talking recently about, having to make decisions about what was important and what was a priority, and things that are important don't have to be priorities. Right. They can still be important and not be a priority. So I think that's where self-care fits in, is that it's important. Let's make it a priority too. And that too.
For some reason, I feel like when people hear self-care, it's seen as like, oh, that's a luxury, or that's selfish. I mean, we would never say that like hygiene is a luxury or selfish, right? Like pretty much along the same lines of self-care. I love the term whole person.
Yeah.
It's important to just be a whole person.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, you know, the cumulative effect of being a whole person, of taking time for self, of, you know, journaling, if you're artsy, drawing, sketching, painting, of making your list and checking off things that you've done, of tapping, all of this creates a more relaxed and whole person. And a more relaxed and whole person is less susceptible to fear taking a hold, to taking grip over their lives. They have more inner resolve, more tools, more ability to deflect that and not take it on. It is the person, and it's the person who's already in a weakened state who is more susceptible to fear taking a stronghold in their life. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we can't avoid things from happening. We can't avoid accidents. We can't avoid people passing away. We can't avoid traumatic things from happening in our lives. What we can control is how we live on a daily basis that makes us stronger and better able to manage those things when they do happen, because they will happen. It's part of life.
Right. So just to recap really briefly, I hear self-analysis of control. What is in my control? What's out of my control? Where are areas where I can build in more control over my environment? And then also this making a priority to be a whole person as a protective effect.
Yes. Protective measure. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a proactive measure.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And for those of us who are already struggling, we're already in that chronic fear life, seeking tools to help break that cycle. And those tools might be hypnotherapy, might be Reiki, might be tapping, EFT, might be exercise, might be any of the things that are, you know, readily available to us for free, but we have to make use of them. We've got to, you know, take that first step to acknowledge that we don't have to live this way. And there are tools and resources out there. There are paid tools and there are free tools, and they're all available to us.
Start somewhere.
Start somewhere, anywhere. Yeah.
Right. So you've talked a lot about how it might physically be manifesting it in ourselves, right? Like IBS syndrome or type of symptoms. What are some words that you hear people say that to you are an indication that there's some underlying fears or anxiety?
Yeah.
They're not seen physical.
Right. That's a good question. So a lot of times when I'm talking with someone, you know, we're talking through a decision and they seem to me really ready to make the decision. And then they say, I just don't know. Well, what do you mean you don't know? You know.
What do you not know?
What do you not know? And so that's very clearly, to me, there's some kind of block there. There's an insecurity. There's a self-doubt. There's something behind that is preventing them from standing in their choice, standing in their decision.
Owning
right? And owning it. So there's some kind of fear that's underneath of that. Deflection sometimes is an indication. So, you know, we're talking through and it seems like the answer is pretty obvious. And then the question is, well, what do you think I should do? And that deflection shows that there's an insecurity of being able to make the decision. Well, where is that insecurity coming from? A fear, usually, of, again, standing in their own power. Right. And so we have to dissect that. Why are you afraid to stand in your own power? Has someone taken your power away from you in the past? Are you afraid to reclaim it? Right? Wow. What do you think will be the consequence of reclaiming that power? And so we can help to kind of dissect it in that way. Right. This is less maybe of an indication of fear and more of an anxiety, but that might be, you know, asking the same question repeatedly, or asking the same question in slightly different words, or choosing, almost like a cognitive dissonance, choosing to ignore certain facts of the situation in order to justify a fear that has been stated. Right. Interesting. So actually stating the fear, and then as we talk about it, just not acknowledging that part of what they've said is a fear or the reason for that fear doesn't actually exist. right?
Like
And
not
so that
matching
anxiety,
reality up with
it
perspective.
doesn't match, right? And so I think that's part of also the basis of fear. It's an emotion. It is not a logical thought. It's an emotion. And when we can approach it from that perspective, that it's an emotional place of being, then logic doesn't really have a place with emotion, right?
So do you address both? Like, or do you start with, let's address fear as an emotion first,
Yeah.
and then let's move on to talking about the logical solution?
Yeah.
How
I
do you
think it's important to address both, because sometimes the fear comes from, an actual thing that is a real and present danger right now. And if we can dissect it from an analytic place, then we can come up with strategies to eliminate the danger. And if we can
use reason to decrease the
right, if we can do that, then the danger goes away, and that person can walk away from that situation with no fear anymore because the danger has gone.
Got it.
If it's a perceived danger, then reason and ration is not going to help.
Mm-hmm.
Right. In that case, we need to understand what's underneath of that. Often they're insecurities, their self-doubts, their past experiences that are not fully processed, that are continuing to harm that person. And for that person, something more like hypnosis or Reiki or tapping might be more appropriate and effective for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not in, like, I could see talk therapy working really well for some more maybe rationally based
Yes.
concerns, and then ones where it doesn't necessarily connect with reality. Then it's like the work needs to be done in the body or something.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And, I hear often, well, hypnosis isn't for everyone. And it's not. It doesn't have to be. Cognitive behavioral therapy isn't for everyone, and it doesn't have to be. And I'm so grateful that we have cognitive behavioral therapy for those people for whom it benefits. I'm also grateful that we have hypnotherapy for those people for whom it benefits.
Right. Different modalities for all the different ways in which bodies and minds need support.
Yes. How we all exist. Yeah.
I also loved earlier your use of the word attunement, just because as a doula, that's one of the words that we use to describe some of the work that we do. Really beginning to attune ourselves with our client emotions and needs. Do you have any recommendations of like books, websites, videos to watch? Maybe start with some like free, widely accessible ones, and then.
Yeah, certainly. So I'll plug my own website. Sunflowers Wellness is where you can reach me for hypnotherapy or for Reiki energy healing sessions.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book that I was introduced to last last spring. I'm not sure when it was. Time doesn't really mean anything right now, right?
No.
It's called A Good Birth by Dr. Ann Lyerly, and it explores the issue of fear in pregnancy and in birth from the perspective of how do we accomplish a birth that we can look back on and say, I feel good about that. And she goes through several different elements that would constitute a birth that one could look back on and say, I feel good about how that went. The outcome isn't the focal point, right? It is the decisions that we made. It is how we were respected, how we felt through each of those phases as a person, as a whole person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a wonderful resource, and I recommend it all the time.
It's called A Good Birth?
A Good Birth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There is, and she's a little out there, maybe not the best for everyone, but I'll give her a plug to Louise Hay, who I just adore. Louise has several books written on ways to change your life, and her big thing is words. It's language. It's how we think about. Yes, absolutely. How we think about ourselves, the impact that our thoughts that continue to play over and over and over again in our minds, the impact that they have on how our body works. She has connected many different common ailments and injuries and diseases to a dis-ease in our mind and spirit. And so when we can address that dis-ease on on the thought level, on the emotion level, and change it and positively manipulate it, then we can see physical improvements in our health, both physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health.
Right.
So I think she's absolutely fantastic. I would also encourage folks to look into tapping. It's something you can learn and do on your own. You don't need to pay a professional to help you do that, although I don't do tapping, but there are professionals who offer that. So you can, look up resources for your area.
Okay. Just going back to this comment about language that we use when you're talking about Louise Hay. So my husband works in education, and he was talking to me recently about what